Welcome to HBOT Journal, a channel dedicated to understanding hyperbaric oxygen therapy through evidence, science, and experience.
Welcome to The Explainer. When we hear the word pressure, especially in a medical context, our minds almost immediately jump to the idea of force, like something being actively pushed or driven into the body. It just feels intuitive, right? Well, today, we're going to break down why that very common idea is, scientifically speaking, incorrect. And we'll explore the much quieter and frankly more interesting physical principle that's actually at work. Okay, here's how we'll tackle this. First, we'll deconstruct that whole pump misconception. Then, we're going to look at how pressure opens up a really fascinating second pathway for oxygen in the body. After that, we'll get into the physics that explains how that oxygen actually moves, explore why just cranking up the pressure isn't the answer, and finally, why time is maybe the most crucial ingredient in this entire process.
So let's start right there with that mental image that we all have. When you hear that pressure is being used to get more oxygen into the body, it is so natural to picture something mechanical, kind of like a bicycle pump forcefully inflating a tire.
Yeah, the picture in our heads is often of pressure acting like a piston, just actively shoving oxygen molecules deeper into our tissues. It's this aggressive, active process. But while that image makes a certain kind of sense, it's just not what's happening at a physical level.
The reality is actually much more subtle and honestly a lot more elegant. See, pressure doesn't really act like a force at all. It acts as a condition. It quietly and uniformly changes the entire environment that the oxygen is in, which in turn makes more of it available for the body to use on its own terms. So if you remember one thing, let it be this. We are not trying to overcome the body's resistance with brute force. Not at all. Instead, we're changing the physical rules of the game so that oxygen itself starts to behave differently. It's a huge shift in thinking, from force to availability.
So how does this increased availability actually do any good? Well, to get that, we need to look at the two ways oxygen travels through our bloodstream. There's the normal, everyday method, and then there's this incredible secondary pathway that is unlocked only by pressure.
Okay, so under normal conditions, almost all of our oxygen travels by hitching a ride on hemoglobin, inside our red blood cells. Just think of these cells as delivery trucks on a highway. They're incredibly efficient, but here's the thing. Once those trucks are full, they are full. Breathing more oxygen at sea level doesn't create more trucks. But pressure opens up a whole second pathway. It allows oxygen to dissolve directly into the plasma, the liquid part of the blood. It's like the river itself, not just the boats on it, starts to carry the cargo. And this brings us right to the core physics principle at work here, dissolution. It is the exact same concept that allows a soda company to dissolve carbon dioxide into water to make a fizzy drink. Under pressure, the liquid can simply hold way more gas molecules. And as soon as you open that bottle and release the pressure, what happens? The gas comes right back out. And you can see that whole process right here. At normal pressure, the red blood cells do pretty much all the work. But as you increase the pressure, the plasma itself becomes this huge, significant reservoir for oxygen, totally independent of those red blood cells. This creates a state of high oxygen availability that you just can't achieve at normal atmospheric pressure.
Okay, so we've established that pressure makes a ton more oxygen available in the blood. But if it isn't being pushed, how does it actually get from the bloodstream into the tissues where it needs to go? Well, the answer isn't force, it's physics.
The movement is all governed by something called a diffusion gradient, and this is a fundamental law of nature. Molecules will always move on their own from an area where there's a lot of them to an area where there are fewer of them. It doesn't require any energy, no pushing. It's as natural and as passive as a ball rolling downhill. And here's what that looks like in the body. The blood in the capillary has a super high concentration of available oxygen. Meanwhile, the tissue next to it has a lower concentration because, well, it's constantly using it up. So oxygen just naturally flows downhill from the blood to the tissue. Pressure doesn't push it. What pressure does is it steepens the slope. By loading up the plasma with all that dissolved oxygen, it makes the top of the hill much, much higher, which in turn makes that natural passive flow way more efficient.
Now, once we understand this really powerful passive mechanism, it leads to a really important question. If a little bit of pressure makes the gradient steeper and improves oxygen delivery, then it stands to reason that more pressure must be better, right?
The answer to that is a very clear and emphatic no. The assumption that more is always better is a really dangerous trap to fall into. The body's systems are incredibly sensitive to these gradients. They don't see a massive change in pressure as optional. They are forced to react. And that reaction is not always a good thing.
A safe and effective protocol isn't about just cranking up one single variable, like pressure. It's about finding this incredibly delicate balance between a whole host of connected factors. You've got the pressure level, the time you spend there, the oxygen concentration, how often you do it, and all of that has to be tailored to a person's individual physiology.
What this really means is that pressure has to be treated like a precision instrument, not some volume knob you can just turn up whenever you want. It requires very careful calculation, constant monitoring, and really strict control. Ultimately, precision, not intensity, is what leads to safety and good outcomes.
And this idea of precision leads us straight to our final and maybe the most important factor of all, time. It's the reason why these sessions are structured around such deliberate, unhurried timelines.
A typical session is always built around 3 distinct phases. The pressure is increased slowly and gradually. Then you have a stable period at your target pressure, and finally, the pressure is brought back down just as slowly and carefully. You just can't rush any of these phases without dramatically increasing the risk.
I love this analogy. Think of it like this. You can pour a whole gallon of water onto a small sponge, but that sponge can only absorb the water at its own rate. Pouring it faster doesn't make the sponge absorb faster. All that happens is the excess spills over the side and makes a mess. It's the same idea here. Rushing the physics by jacking up the pressure doesn't force the body's biology to speed up. All it does is bypass the benefit and add unnecessary risk.
And this really gets to the core concept. While the laws of physics let us change the environment almost instantly, the body's biological response is gradual, it's complex, and it is completely dependent on time. We have to respect that biological timeline.
So let's bring it all home. We use pressure not to force anything, but to quietly change the physical environment. This makes a huge amount of oxygen available in the blood plasma. That in turn creates a steep, natural gradient for oxygen to flow passively into the tissues. But, and this is the key, for all of that to happen safely and effectively, we have to provide the one thing biology always requires: time.
And ultimately understanding this relationship between pressure, availability, and time, it really highlights why this has to be a supervised medical process. It's all built on a deep understanding of physics and physiology, where every single variable is precisely controlled. Because the goal is never to overpower the body with force, but to create the absolute ideal conditions for its own amazing processes to work more efficiently.
To continue learning, explore the HBOT Journal channel.